Thanks for stopping by Vintage Audio Review. In this episode I will be reviewing the VanAlstine Model One preamp. From what I can tell, the Model One was manufactured around 1977 and was considered very high-end and pure. There are no tone controls, which lends to this idea of purity. Personally, I like having tone controls and a tone bypass control, but that's just me. The quality of components used is high. As someone who repairs electronics, I am not a fan of the module approach they use. I am guessing that the modules are potted and are not repairable. The preamp is built solidly using aluminum and weighs in at about 7.5 pounds and is approximately 17 inches by 3.5 inches by 9 inches. From a repair standpoint, the unit is not too difficult to take apart once you have done it a few times. I did reach out to the legendary owner of the company that bears his name, Frank VanAlstine, in order to see if there was a copy of the Model One owner's manual. I was hoping to find specs on the unit. He was kind enough to reply back, and he did not have one. We exchanged several emails along the way, of which I am very grateful. As can be seen here, the Model One has two line level inputs, a phono input, which is supposed to be for moving magnet cartridges, more on that later, and a tape input, which is selected by pressing the monitor button. Volume, balance, and mute controls are there, as well as the power switch. The rear of the unit has two unswitched AC outlets and a single switched AC outlet. There is a grounding lug for the phono connection, and there are two audio out jacks, which are each electrically at the same point. The AC power cord is very robust. With the cover off, you can see the minimalist design and the modules. The two on the left are for the phono stage equalization and amplification, and the two on the right are the linear amplifiers for the line level and post phono EQ stages. I like the way the input and output jacks are mounted horizontally. There was a screw or something loose inside the unit as it rattled when I moved the unit. It turned out to be a locking nut from one of the screws that fastened down the RCA input-output board. For troubleshooting, I hooked up the QA402 analyzer to the spare line input, and it showed that the right preamp out 1 was much less than the left channels, probably about 40 dB less. I then hooked up the outputs to the left and right preamp out 2 jacks, and the problem disappeared. From that little piece of information, it was easy to deduce that the right preamp out jack's center conductor was not making contact with the circuit board. Disassembly of the main board from the chassis did indeed show that to be the case, and it was repaired by adding a strap to the remaining part of the terminal as seen here. There were several other terminal straps for both inputs and outputs that had broken loose over time, and they were repaired as well. I also applied some solder to the ground portion of the top and bottom of each RCA connector in order to strengthen them so they would be more difficult to break the center conductor from. I'm sure there are replacements for these connectors that would work, but I did not have any at the time, and I like the solder. With the QA402's output connected to the Model One's tuner input, the THD SNR measured very well, with a 2-volt RMS 1 kHz signal applied and the volume balance control adjusted for 0 dB gain, or 2 volts RMS output. It was the best I have measured to date for any preamp. Next, the frequency response was measured under the same conditions and showed an outstanding performance once again. The channel-to-channel matching was less than 0.3 dB, and the worst case flatness was about 1/4 dB. I don't think I've seen anything better. I decided to see where the frequency response went down about 0.5 dB, and that was 31 kHz for the right channel and 44 kHz for the left channel. Pretty decent in my humble opinion. I decided to check the phono stage. I was pretty excited about that and was in for a bit of a shock. It measured just like a line level input. I did notice some wires on the underside of the circuit board when I had it apart. but did not really pay much attention to them at the time. I am guessing that the phono EQ stages were bypassed either because they had stopped working or a previous owner did not need or want to use the phono stage. Maybe he had a moving coil cartridge that he wanted to hook up instead and just wanted another line input. The current owner of the Model 1 is fine with the phono stage being a line level input, so that mystery will remain. The final measurement was to see what the maximum voltage level was that the preamp could deliver before distortion got bad. It put out about 7.5 volts, looking really good, but at 8 volts RMS it looked pretty ugly. Both the balance and volume controls are very easy to move, but there is no midpoint detemp for the balance control. I set the balance using the QA402 and adjusted the knob's set screw so its indicator was at the midpoint. The pilot light in this unit is also burned out. It is a 120 volt AC unit and could be found for about $10 online. It turns out that the preamp is always on when plugged in. I was surprised to find that out. The power switch only turns on the pilot light and the switched AC outlet. Presumably having the preamp on all the time reduces turn on and turn off transients. While the balance control did not exhibit any scratchiness, the volume control did. The pots are sealed, so there is no way to spray a cleaner lube in them like deoxit. I set up the Model 1 as well as my 1988 vintage Carver CT7 tuner preamp to do an A/B comparison. This time I used the QA402 audio analyzer to make sure both paths were equal in amplitude and frequency response prior to starting the listening. The CT7 preamp tuner did require a few very minor adjustments of the tone controls to get a flat frequency response. Here are the frequency response for each. The VanAlstine is on the right and is flatter, 0.4 dB max across the band, though the CT7 is not too bad at plus or minus 0.4 dB. And here are the 1 kHz levels and THD SNRs for each. The VanAlstine is on the left. Both are within plus or minus 3 millivolts of each other and of each channel. Both preamps have pretty low THDs, but the VanAlstine is cleaner. The SNRs for both preamps are around 80 dB. These plots are a bit worse than when either is tested directly and not going through the extra cables and switch box. I tested the Nokia switch box to see what it contributes, and its contribution is negligible. The right channel's input-output cables are from the QA402 and were connected to an RCA coupler, and the left channel's input and output cables were connected to the Nokia switch box. Both left and right channels look the same, and I just plotted one of them. For listening, I used a 200 watt channel Sound Craftsman PCR 800 amplifier connected to my KEF 107s without the cube equalizer. The source was my Surfan's F20 hi-fi player. I listened to a variety of music at a decent level and could not tell any difference switching between the two preamps. None at all. I obviously heard a difference when I switched on the CT7 sonic holography. Both preamps did their job and sounded fine. I think the VanAlstine Model 1 is still a great, clean, minimalist preamp for someone, though the scratchiness of this unit's volume control is of a little concern. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe and give me some comments.